As Gojo heads to fight Sukuna, him and his team of Utahime, Gakuganji, and Ichiji arrive in Shibuya, with Gojo saying, "It sure feels like it's been a while, Shibuya." Gojo saying this prompts Ichiji to ask Gojo, "What was your sense of time like in the prison realm?" Gojo describes the flow of time in the prison realm to essentially feel the same as the feeling of being extremely busy at work, and the whole week just flashing by through life while simultaneously feeling so long that you never want to do it again. A contradictory feeling. It makes sense as Ichiji says those kind of feelings are the worst. Gojo then asks Ichiji, "What happened to the people I used Infinite Void on?" If you remember, he's referencing the citizens of Shibuya when Gojo was fighting the disaster spirits. Ichiji begins to explain that this place was the ground zero for the explosion of cursed spirits during the Shibuya incident. The survival of a non-sorcerer in Tokyo got lower the closer they were to Shibuya. But thanks to your residual cursed energy, no cursed spirits would even approach the area you cast your domain in. Thus, it kept all of them safe. Then Gojo asks, "What about the after effects of my domain?" To which Ichiji responds saying, "There were none. They've already returned to their regular lives." So Gojo says, "Well then, that's perfect. Let's get started." Gojo calls for Utahime and Gakuganji to begin the battle against Sukuna. We cut to Sukuna and Ryomen in Shibuya as well. Ryomen says it's now the 24th, the day of the decisive battle, but the exact time and place weren't even set. Sukuna cuts off Ryomen saying, "There's no need for that, as I can just feel it." Sukuna's basically saying he knows where to find Gojo, and as Sukuna looks afar from the rooftop, he can sense Gojo's immense cursed energy welling up, saying, "Speak of the devil." Before the battle begins, we flash back to Gojo and Gakuganji in a room. Gakuganji admitting to Gojo, saying that the one who murdered Yaga was me. Gojo's a little confused and responds with a delayed okay, which prompts Gakuganji to ask Gojo, "Why? Why haven't you all cursed me?" And Gojo responds to Gakuganji by saying, "I think I know a lot about you through Yaga, what has become of the one who does everything by the book religiously. That's exactly why I can trust a portion of you, despite your actions. I mean, you killed Yaga due to receiving orders from the higher-ups, and me being sealed may have played a role. It's a mess, but I don't want to blame you for his death." Gojo then asks Gakuganji, "Did Yaga tell you anything at the end of his life?" And Gakuganji says yes, it was about the specifics of Panda's creation. This makes Gojo happy, as he says, "So people like you can even change at that old age? Because you didn't tell the higher-ups." If you remember, Yaga was a grade 1 who was truly a special grade sorcerer due to his ability to potentially create an infinite amount of cursed beings like Panda. But he never disclosed that ability to the higher-ups so he can stay off the radar. Gojo goes on to say, "Well, it would be better if you became the head of the higher-ups." And then it shows us a satisfying page of all the higher-ups being rightfully slaughtered by someone. We don't know, this is left up to interpretation. Then we move on to another talk with Gojo, but it's between him and Ichiji this time. With Ichiji asking Gojo, "Why me? If it's just for putting up a barrier, there should be anyone who's better than me." And Gojo asks him, "You really don't get it, man? You're the one I can trust the most. That's all." All of this exposition between Gojo and his team is just great. It adds a lot of emotional weight. As it cuts back to the present, we see Ichiji begin to place down a barrier, while thinking of what Gojo said to him, saying that he's more scared than anything, but the strongest said he believes in him, so if he can't live up to that, then he will die here. Meanwhile, Ichiji is preparing the barrier. We cut to Utahime using her curse technique, Solo Forbidden Zone. This technique temporarily amplifying the curse energy output of any sorcerer, including Utahime herself. And it's further explained that a sorcerer's skill is determined by how much they can shorten the process of activating their curse technique, such as removing hand seals or chants in order to activate the technique. However, Utahime doesn't skip anything when activating her technique. Curse words, hand seals, and her dance, Utahime utilizes 120% of her curse technique's effect by elevating her technique into a ritual. History's strongest sorcerer or the current strongest sorcerer? This one blow will determine who is the challenger within the domain of this battle. To give Sukuna the slightest taste of what he is truly capable of, Gojo begins to chant, "Kutsuna, Henko, Karasuto Shomio, Hiyori no Hazama," elevating his technique into a ritual such as Utahime did. And with their combined rituals, Gojo opens the stage with a 200% hollow purple. Sukuna immediately feels the immense pressure of this technique and responds by attempting to stop it, but to no avail. Because of the barrier Ichiji had placed, Sukuna had misread Gojo's first attack, and although he had sensed Gojo's power from afar, he could not perceive the immensity of the output until the technique was right in front of him. And thus, Purple annihilates Sukuna, or so it seemed. Sukuna emerges from the appetizer of carnage and destruction that Gojo decided to open up their battle with no more than a decimated arm. As history's strongest sorcerer and the present strongest sorcerer comes face to face and meets their gazes, they know it's time to decide who is truly the honored one. Gojo has landed the first blow, thus he makes it very clear to Sukuna that in this instance, Sukuna is the challenger. The battle between the two deities begins. Two kings arrive onto the battlefield, with Sukuna saying to Gojo, "I'm the challenger? You seem to be pretty pleased with yourself for only landing a surprise attack." He proceeds to make it very clear to Gojo that, "You are but a fish atop my cutting board, Gojo Satoru. A bit fresher than the others, but still, just a nameless fish. So let's start by peeling off those scales." In response to this, Gojo begins to stretch and asks Sukuna, "Let me ask you, why are you still wearing that face? Did you believe that I'd hold back if you looked like that? Unfortunately for you, I've been doing some special training, and since it's Megami I'm fighting here, I can go all out." The two immediately clash with one another and begin to trade blows. Gojo immediately drops to the floor and activates the Limitless, which pulls Sukuna towards a glass monument, eventually crashing him right through it. As Sukuna attempts to regain his footing, he notices that Gojo's right in front of him, pressuring him with stomps, meanwhile utilizing his Limitless ability to manipulate the gravity around Sukuna. As Gojo leads Sukuna right into the spot that he needs him to be in, he leaps into the air and proceeds to use blue to lift a building within his vicinity and send it hurling towards Sukuna. The King of Curses is then able to catch it very briefly, but then sidestep in order to get out of the attack. Sukuna runs alongside the top of the building and jumps into the middle of the air, firing a dismantle. This catches Gojo off guard and prompts him to dodge. This makes the dismantle that Sukuna shot at Gojo hit the building behind him. Sukuna wasn't even done yet though, as he proceeds to follow up with a punch that Gojo also happens to react to, stopping it with the Limitless. As the impact of the punch shatters the building behind the two monsters fly into it in order to continue their battle, readying their punches to clash with one another. The collision of the two forces the entire building to collapse on top of them. As the dust settles, the two deities walk out of the debris unscathed, further solidifying that these two are just on their own level. We cut over to the rest of the cast viewing this battle, and Choso says, "Domain amplification?" Yuta responds to Choso saying that, "I saw footage of this in Mekamaru's footage of the Shibuya incident," with Hakari saying, "It seems as if Gojo's domain has been neutralized by Sukuna, but how?" Kusakabe answers this saying, "It's a more refined version of the simple domain, which works by allowing you to sheathe yourself in a domain without using a curse technique. Thus, your opponent's curse technique flows into that space that your own curse technique is supposed to fulfill." Kusakabe lets us know that this is a high-level technique by saying of course he can't in response to Miwa asking if he could do this. After hearing this, Higuruma states that he gets the gist of how the ability works, which reminds the audience of the Day 1 Grade 1 genius that is Hiromi Higuruma. Then we move on to Angel explaining that the main drawback of utilizing a domain amplification is the fact that you can't activate your curse technique when doing so. Panda asks, "So Sukuna's fighting without a curse technique?" To which Angel clarifies by saying that even Sukuna is no exception to this rule, and that if Sukuna can find a way around the Limitless without using domain amplification, he will win. Miwa then says, "If this is the case, then why isn't Sukuna using domain expansion? After using a domain, your technique tends to become unstable, right? So it'd be a good idea for Sukuna to challenge Gojo to a domain clash to destabilize his Limitless." Kara responds to this saying that, "It's easy to say that, but depending on the outcome of the domain clash, the battle will essentially be over." Miwa then says, "Isn't that a good thing?" Then Kiara agrees. Yuji clarifies to everybody that Sukuna's short hit effect within his own domain would allow him to hit Gojo in the first place, since this is something that Gojo told Yuji himself after all. These questions prompt Uiui to ask, could it be possible that Sukuna doesn't believe he'll defeat Gojo in a clash of domains? Shoko then says to Uiui, if that were the case, then Gojo would know due to his 6 eyes and open his own domain. Choso decides to chime in and says, what if their domains don't clash due to Sukuna's domain not closing off a barrier? Upon hearing this information, Kusakabe, Kashimo, Hakari, and Yuta all expressed disbelief, with Mima asking, "Is it really that crazy?" Random fodder mask dude then asks, "You guys talk about using these domains as if they're simple, but using one consumes an insane amount of cursed energy, doesn't it?" To which Inumaki says, "But Gojo's cursed energy is limitless." Random fodder mask dude then retorts saying that it only seems that way because of how efficiently he's able to use his cursed energy, so he's able to recover more than he is using at all times. But if Gojo were to use his domain over and over, it'd be a different story altogether. Kashima, on the other hand, hypes up Sukuna by saying that the sharpness of Sukuna's cursed energy, the way that Sukuna can turn on a dime from amplification to technique, if Gojo didn't have the 6 eyes, in terms of efficiency, Sukuna would certainly be winning. Yuta also reinforces Sukuna's cursed energy feats by stating that off of his intuition alone, he'd guessed that Sukuna has more than double the amount of cursed energy that Yuta himself has. But Yuta also uses this fact to clarify that cursed energy is not the reason these two are holding off on their own domains. Momo then says, maybe it's just that nobody, even including those two, have any idea as to how their domains will react to one another. If they clash their domains, who knows what would happen. She begins to redirect her attention, and Hiruma says, "Here it comes." And we see Gojo and Sukuna in their barriers with unlimited void being casted around the malevolent shrine. Peak fiction, man. And there's a certain charm and badassery of seeing Gojo and Sukuna's faces at each other, the pure enjoyment they're getting out of this domain clash. They know that these two are the only two that can satisfy one another. A true clash of gods. Perfect page, and one of the best in the series. In this page, they make sure to let us know that these two domains are equally matched, and that should either one sustain damage, causing the collapse of their domain, the other's sure-hit attack will immediately strike. Evenly matched. Within the barrier, they are evenly matched. But the effective range of Sukuna's domain reaches outside the barrier of Gojo's domain. The barrier of a domain is weak against attacks from the outside. As the blade of Sukuna reaches Gojo's neck, the battle ends. Or does it? Gojo automatically regenerates the slash using his reverse curse technique within Sukuna's domain. Choso points out that Gojo has the option to run away, with Hakari reinforcing this statement by stating that it should be easy for Gojo to escape, but Kusakabe corrects it too, letting them know that Gojo moves by teleporting, and since his domain is destroyed, he won't be able to use his technique in order to do so. With Kusakabe confirming to Miwa that in this moment, Gojo is in some serious trouble. I'm glad. With regard to curse technique, I'm overwhelmingly stronger. Gojo withstands the curse technique, but Sukuna makes sure to apply more pressure, asking him, "Did you think I'd let you go?" The two trade multiple blows and come to a brief standstill, both making astute observations about the other. Sukuna says he moves well for someone using reverse curse technique at full throttle to keep my curse technique at bay, whereas Gojo says apparently Malevolent Shrine Center isn't Sukuna, but it's the shrine itself. We cut to Yuji asking, what if Gojo were to destroy the domain? Kusakabe says, normally the objects or constructions within a domain do not have any new meaning or function. In other words, they may not exist. With Mei reinforcing that if the shrine is a symbol of the domain, then it cannot be broken. There's no point in really trying either. If Gojo with his 6 eyes hasn't attempted to do so yet, then it's likely futile. Kiara asks, so there's no point in trying? We cut back to Gojo activating the new shadow style, simple domain. And Yuji asks, didn't he say he couldn't do this? Kusakabe says, nah. What he means is, he can't teach it. Since Gojo is a genius and understands most techniques without actually having to learn them, it makes him unsuited to teach the technique and guide someone through the learning process. He also goes on to explain the purpose of simple domain within this fight, saying that it will allow for Gojo to negate the guaranteed hit while he's healing himself with reverse curse technique, questioning how Gojo is managing to utilize these two techniques at once. Choso chimes in and says that, compared to a real domain, the curse energy output for a simple domain will do nothing but buy time. Since simple domain is such a low level technique, it's also weak in terms of output. As Gojo opens another simple domain, with Sukuna stating that this is no more than tedious, the two begin to clash once more. As Sukuna lands another direct flurry of slashes, Gojo casts another simple domain, but this time he doesn't activate his reverse curse technique. Yuta points out that Gojo wouldn't run out of curse energy, whereas the random fodder mask dude says that Sukuna may have pressured Gojo enough to a point where it was possible. We cut back to the two gods fighting, and see another slash hit Gojo's neck. It is then asked, is Gojo Satoru going to lose? Gojo grabs onto Sukuna with Sukuna stating that Gojo's speed has increased. Gojo then keeps his legs wrapped around Sukuna and leans back. After he does this, he activates Red, sending Sukuna flying right into his own shrine. As Sukuna is heavily wounded, Gojo wipes himself off, calling Sukuna no more than a pain in the ass. Gojo manages to pull off that clutch comeback against Sukuna. We cut back to Kusakabe and Yuta. Kusakabe asking Yuta if he's really used reverse curse technique in order to heal his burnt out technique. He yells at Akotsu to answer him. Then Yuta says, that's impossible, but I can't say that. After all, Gojo Sensei already did it. With Yuta further saying that injuries to the body are totally different from the feeling of technique burnout after a domain expansion. It's similar to how a machine will behave erratically after it overheats. Even if it's not malfunctioning, all you can do is simply wait for it to cool down. Maki then clarifying, so even if reverse curse technique can fix the damage, it can't cool down technique burnout. Yuta says that's what I thought, but maybe I just wasn't thinking hard enough. Where's that really? What if Gojo Sensei's pushing things way too far? And we already know that the 5-minute merchant is praying that he doesn't have to go next. As we come back to Gojo's Sukuna, Gojo then asks Sukuna, you can make the effective range even bigger, right? Which prompts Sukuna to actually prepare to increase the effective range of Malevolent Shrine to its maximum. Kusakabe asking Gojo if he's stupid for baiting him into this. Then Gojo goes ahead and activates his Unlimited Void. Gojo once again expands his domain. With Ino asking, are they just gonna do the same thing again? Shoko clarifying to Ino that Gojo's not that naive to bang his head against the wall. Then Higuruma goes ahead and clarifies to the cast, saying that Gojo reversed his barrier's interior and exterior conditions. This allowing Kusakabe to clarify to the audience that Gojo's domain is now stronger against attacks from the outside rather than the inside. So what's going on here is in this moment, Gojo has decided to reverse his barrier's conditions so he can't have it broken from the outside again like Sukuna did in chapter 225. As both Gojo and Sukuna have activated their domains, they begin to engage in hand-to-hand combat. As Gojo is pushed back by Sukuna, he notices something. He notices that Sukuna is able to use domain amplification while expanding his domain, expressing disbelief. He asks, is Sukuna used to this? His output's even greater than before as well, but it's not impossible either. As domain amplification prevents you only from using the innate curse technique engraved in your body. But if the curse technique is already imbued in your domain, it's a completely different story. As Gojo's able to pick up on Sukuna's strategy, he strikes back, throwing punches at Sukuna, bobbing and weaving, while saying, well, so what? And he lands a liver shot right on Sukuna. To be honest, I never expected to see liver shots thrown in Jujutsu Kaisen, especially on Sukuna. I mean, look at him, he is reeling. But after Gojo manages to land his punch on Sukuna, he slides behind him, pushing his own back against Gojo's. As Gojo notices this, he says, what? Within my domain, Sukuna's short hit technique is turned off. And now, you guys are not ready for this. We are about to see that Gojo is not the only prodigy fighting in this battle. At this moment, Kenjaku explains to us, the only people who aren't affected by Unlimited Void are Gojo Satoru himself and those touching him. And Sukuna clarifies as well, saying that he's already experienced the Unlimited Void before in chapter 15. In order to destroy Gojo Satoru's domain from the outside, Sukuna made the effective range of his own domain smaller than it was in Shibuya in order to increase its potency. To increase its potency even further, he used a binding vow that removed the short hit command from the porch of the Malevolent Shrine within Gojo Satoru's domain. Meanwhile, he was able to bypass Unlimited Void by touching Gojo in the first place. And now once again, Gojo Satoru's domain has collapsed. Sukuna looks back at Gojo and says, "Let's try this again," and sends him flying with a fury of slashes. Once Yuji witnesses, he yells why, and Kusakabe is easily able to figure out what happened, saying that Sukuna probably changed the conditions on his domain as well. Kashimo cuts in and says, "Hey, if that guy dies, it's my turn next. Don't stand in my way." Coming back into the fight, Sukuna expresses dismay, as the wounds on Gojo are shallow. As Gojo expresses to Sukuna that he learned this technique when he was a child, but he's never used it after getting his domain expansion. Not bad, right? And then Kusakabe figures this out too. I mean, who is this guy, right? Damn Gege himself. Anyways, he says that's Falling Blossom Emotion. Everybody else doesn't know what that is. Anyways, Kusakabe, knowing everything, says it's a secret anti-domain skill that's been passed down in the 3 great families. Panda's like, it's so secret that you know about it? And damn, bro, I was praying that Gege forgot about Panda's existence. But Kusakabe answers Panda, saying that it's a type of curse energy manipulation that is programmed to use curse energy to automatically repel anything that touches you. Against something like Unlimited Void, it has no use, but against a straightforward slashing technique such as Sukuna's, it's quite useful. It's not something that can also be ripped apart like Simple Domain. And now we see the difference between Falling Blossom Emotion and Simple Domain. I never really knew, and I don't think anybody else really knew either, so it's good to get something like that in this chapter. And honestly, I'm gonna say this again, Gege is not rushing the series. If Gege is taking time out of the story to explain things like this to us, I don't think Jujutsu Kaisen is being rushed. I don't think it's ending as fast as we think it is. When series are getting rushed, they kind of end abruptly and they skip a lot of things and use a lot less time on important things. Gege is using a lot of time on things that aren't very important. He really could have just went through this entire story without ever clarifying this to us. And Choso the Pessimist says, but there's no way for you to come out unscathed. It's just not something that can rival the output of the domain. Like, bro, we've heard you. You said this in the last chapter. But Shoko says it's enough. Gojo can use reverse curse technique in order to heal out his burned out technique if he can buy himself the minimum amount of time. It'll be okay. And then you see Mr. Stopwatch in the corner panting and sweating. Man, he know his 5 minutes ain't saving him here. Could never be Kashimo. Anyways, we see Gojo activate the domain expansion. And his domain expansion is completely massive. All the characters are questioning him, asking him what he's doing. And Ino, for once in his life, has faith in Gojo. Kashimo asks, is he trying to engulf all of Sukuna's effective range? And Kusakabe says, why are they able to just change their domain's requirements over and over again? Mei saying, isn't this a blunder? Increasing the range will considerably reduce the refinement of the domain. And then Higuruma says, even if you protect it from being destroyed on the outside, it doesn't matter if you lose on the inside. Bro, I would never want these people on my team, man. Kiara yells, another failure? Momo saying, wait, the barrier is becoming so small? A small barrier? Well, in theory, it could serve to strengthen the barrier. But it's not even the size of a basketball. Kusakabe says, hold on a second, that's impossible. Mei says, well, I think we've said impossible enough times today, right? Maki interjects and says, why? A barrier's outward appearance and how big it is on the inside almost never match as it is. And Kusakabe then responds saying, that's why once you're trapped in a domain, unless you've somehow found the edge, you can't even escape. And even if you reach the edge, a normal domain is resistant to attacks from the inside. But there are still limits, Musclehead. Maki's just like, well, don't blame me, blame my dumbass teacher, and she's right. As we know, Gojo can't really teach all that well. He goes on to explain, usually if you try to envision a barrier too small to hold even yourself and your opponent, it would just collapse. But Choso then says, the prison realm. And this helps Kusakabe Akutami realize that what Gojo's actually doing here is changing the rules of his domain every single time he uses it. And then this causes me to ask what exactly this means, and Kusakabe breaks it down, saying barriers, particularly domain barriers, typically have set intervals and external parameters like volume and creation speed. By discovering their own blend of these parameters, every sorcerer is able to establish their own domain barrier. And this causes Higuruma Hakari to question what he's saying because obviously their domains don't work under these rules. And Kusakabe Akatami then further says that, Higuruma Hakari, you two are exceptions because your domains open by default as part of your curse techniques. But in any case, they aren't usually things that can be changed on the fly with each use. So Hakari and Higuruma can actually bypass these things. This is why when Hakari fought Kashimo, he was just able to teleport him into the water. Kusakabe then says, was it too difficult for Gojo to maintain such a huge barrier that he had to compress it down to that tiny basketball size? And Meimei's like, maybe he just wanted to see if he could cover Malevolent Shrine. And as the barrier begins to shake, she says it's holding out. It cracks open and everybody begins to state what they think will happen. And then it explodes. We see Sukuna come out with the Malevolent Shrine and Gojo with nothing. This causes Yuji and everybody else to panic. But in truth, Sukuna has taken much damage. Upon seeing this, Hakari and everybody else begin to scream from excitement. And Hakari points out that Sukuna was able to destroy Gojo's domain from the outside, whereas Gojo was able to damage Sukuna to the point where he could no longer maintain his domain. This has Kusakabe screaming for the time, trying to find out how long Gojo's barrier lasted. Meimei then says it lasted exactly 3 minutes and 9 seconds. This causes Higuruma to point out that, since their domains have collapsed, neither of them can use curse techniques. Maki then says Gojo can now make the first move since he's able to restore his burnt out technique with reverse curse technique. But Sukuna can do it too. Yuta says, if you put it like that, then I can do that as well. But as I said earlier, I can't heal a burnt out technique. Angel then comes in and says that Gojo made the mistake of showing this to Sukuna. And when it's asked why this is a problem, she says that with Kenjaku's help, Sukuna was able to split his soul into 20 cursed objects, the fingers, and after seeing it just once, he learned how to do this to himself. So now that Sukuna saw Gojo restoring his own burnt out curse technique, he's probably able to do it as well. Sukuna leaps off the building and runs from Gojo. As Gojo begins to chase him, he lands right behind Sukuna, destroying everything below him. Sukuna lands on a rail, but Gojo flies right in front of him and throws a kick at him, pushing Sukuna back. This causes Gojo to ask, why is Sukuna not using any other curse techniques other than the ones granted to his domain? Even when the interior strength of the barrier lowered after I flipped the internal and external conditions, he didn't try to destroy it from the inside, but he chose the riskier option. While we were cancelling out each other's short hit effects from within the domain, Sukuna had no choice but to use domain amplification to defeat my limitless curse technique, and that's a huge advantage for me. As I saw before, in a domain he can't use buildings to attack me. In fact, until my domain was destroyed from the outside, I had the upper hand for 3 minutes. And in spite of all of this, Sukuna still didn't attempt to use the 10 shadows. Sukuna has the memory of me and Megami's conversation, so he knows I know about Maharaga. Is he scared I'll beat it with a single attack? And as the wheel of fate spins once, a nosebleed begins. So as King Stopwatch himself begins to freak out for the 100th time in this battle because he knows he would never stand a chance against those two, Gojo and Sukuna just whip out another domain expansion. This is like their 4th or 5th time. And what's so interesting about this is these two spamming their domains is so unpredictable, yet they do it every chapter. Nobody's gonna assume that these two are gonna use their domains in the next chapter, but I bet you they will. So anyways, Mr. Useless says, at the same time, with Angel then saying, that means Sukuna can also regenerate his burnt out curse technique by using the reverse curse technique, like she was saying in the last chapter. I was wondering if he was able to do it or if he learned it. How many times have we said curse technique today? And nah, for real though, I probably said curse technique over 100 times in the last 7 chapters. Anyways, Lord Gege himself then says, during the 3 minutes of Sukuna destroying Gojo's domain from the outside, Gojo will have to deal damage so that Sukuna can no longer maintain his domain. And we are blessed with hand-to-hand combat panels more than usual, which 4 pages, we usually get about 2 or 3. But I guess Gege decided to have a little bit of fun. As Gojo throws a barrage of punches at Sukuna, Sukuna's pushed back and Gojo speeds right behind him. Sukuna thinks that Gojo's gonna continue to do a blow, thus readies himself for a counter, but Gojo instead uses the Infinity in order to accelerate Sukuna's pushback from his previous barrage and send him flying into his own shrine. Gojo then grabs Sukuna once again with his tactile telekinesis that he apparently has now, pulls him towards him, and throws a punch at him. Sukuna catches it while Gojo smirks in laughter. After this, both of their domains collapse, with Sukuna being the one who takes damage. Kusakabe then says it was the same timing again, with Mei saying, "Sheesh, don't make us nervous." But then Miwa clarifies that this means that Gojo's stronger in the domain, right? Yuji's hope is reaffirmed, with him saying so he can win. Gojo then sends Sukuna flying with another punch, and they ready their domains once more. With both Yuta and Higuruma noticing something, and Hakari confirms it. Yuta says maybe, and just maybe, Gojo's domain expansion was a bit early. Because you healed your body, you had to heal your curse technique late. It wasn't even 0.1 seconds, but you took it, the unlimited void. And it's shown that Sukuna has lost the domain battle. Inside Gojo Satoru's domain, 2 minutes and 40 seconds after the last domain expansion, the Malevolent Shrine collapsed. And thus, Gojo has finally won a domain battle, and Sukuna is now stunned due to the effects of the unlimited void. Gojo, seeing this opportunity, then says not yet. I'm at least going to crush the heart, the lungs, and the liver. I'm going to bring him closer to death than Yuji at the juvenile training school. And then we see it click. It is shown that Maharaga has adapted to something, and is now summoned. 8-handled sword, Divergent Seal of Divine General Maharaga. And with this, Gojo reacts to this summoning by saying right now, but before it adapts to Unlimited Void, I will destroy him in one shot. Gojo then attempts to ready up a curse technique Reversal Red, but it is shown that Maharaga destroyed Gojo's domain almost instantly, because he's already adapted to it. And right there, the chapter ends. And as they all witness the incarnation of destruction joining this fight, Mei says the trump card of the Zeni clan. Choso then says the Shikigami that could adapt to many kinds of attacks. How does he know what Maharaga is? Who knows? Yuji then says, what? But did it also adapt to Infinite Void? We then see Mei's crows take over, and we transition to Sukuna and Maharaga posing. Sukuna's like, Gojo already knows about Maharaga. And for the first time in a while, Gege goes out of his way to explain what's going on here. He says, Sukuna took Yorozu's attacks during their fight in order to adapt Maharaga to Yorozu's techniques. Thus, he was able to see through Yorozu's curse technique. The must-hit order was set off with the 5 domain expansions. The everything inside the domain from Gojo Satoru, and the everything other than himself from Sukuna. The must-hit order to him is not set off. He took over to adapt to the Unlimited Void. The one who took over was... And before we get the answer to this, we cut to Gojo contemplating the same thing, trying to figure out what Sukuna has just done. Gojo then says, it adapted to the Unlimited Void in 0.01 seconds? Impossible. The wheel didn't even spin. Moreover, Maharaga was summoned after the domain expansion. Sukuna took over to adapt? No. The one who took over was, and then we finally get the answer. That is Megami. Megami was the one who was hit by the Unlimited Void. Sukuna then appears and says, your face says, you have something you want to say, huh? Gojo's like, nah, I'm happy because you're fighting more desperately than I thought. Sukuna then says, not as desperate as you have been. The Infinite Void is a curse technique that is only enabled inside the domain. But to be honest, I thought it was no more than a burden. I wanted to rid your hand of that card. While I wasn't using domain amplification, I had Megami adapt using the 10 shadows. Thanks to that, I wasn't able to use a curse technique other than that which was applied to my domain. But it seems like I had enough return for it. And if you were wondering why Sukuna hasn't been using the 10 shadows for this entire fight, I think that explains it. Gojo then says what Megami took over was the process to adapt to the Unlimited Void, not the result of it. It doesn't mean that you had Megami's soul adapt to Infinite Void, so if I use domain expansion again, you have no other option than to summon Maharaga. I will demolish it in one shot if you do so. Then Sukuna's like, well, try your best to activate your domain. We see that Gojo's shocked, and tons of blood comes out of his nose. Even Kusakabe doesn't even know what's going on. That's how you know it's crazy. Sukuna then says, "You're recovering your burnt out innate curse technique with the reverse curse technique, and it seems like you've now overexerted yourself. The curse technique is engraved around the prefrontal cortex of your right brain. You destroyed your brain and restored it with the reverse curse technique in order to reset the burnt out curse technique." Yuta's like, this is way too risky to even do once. Kusakabe then figures it out, saying the brain, especially the part that relates with the curse technique, is a black box. It's not that simple to fix, even if you can think of it. Choso then says it's fair to say that the amount he used caused him to nearly die. Yuji's counting on his hands the amount of times he's done this. 5 times? Shoko's like, I thought Gojo was accustomed to doing this, but he still had after effects. Sukuna has healed less, so he has fewer after effects. Normally I take the time to break this down and explain it, but the characters are already explaining these things well enough. Sukuna then says, it's different from healing your flesh and bones. You're reaching your limits, right? And even if you aren't, you will die. Or the precision will be so low that you can't keep up with me. Next, I'll be closing my domain with a barrier, and there will be no escape this time. All I have to do is cut you and adapt to that limitless. See ya, strongest. A guy that was just born when I didn't exist. An ordinary guy. No more. Domain expansion. As Sukuna activates his domain expansion for the last time, it's instantly destroyed. Everybody's in shock, and we come back to Sukuna's eyes, face, just blood everywhere. Blood flowing out of his face like a damn waterfall. It's then said, Sukuna endured the infinite void for less than 10 seconds. But like Gojo Satoru, his brain was damaged to the point where he couldn't even expand his domain anymore. Gojo gets up and Sukuna wipes the blood off his face, with Gojo beginning to laugh. So it's affecting you, huh? My students are watching, so I still gotta look cool. With that, Gojo gets up and lands an earth-shattering punch to Sukuna's face. Round 2 begins. Chapter starts off with Kusakabe asking if somebody has ever received a serious punch from Gojo. Panda was like, I've punched him. Oh my god, this dude needs to die. But anyways, my fault. Yuta goes ahead and says, not a serious punch, but he's punched me using the Limitless. And then Hakari says, me too. I don't know if this implies that they've been training with Gojo before, like everything in the events of the series happened. And I honestly believe this because why would Gojo not train with Yuta and Hakari at least once using their abilities? Especially after seeing Hakari's domain, I think Gojo would be more than interested with training Hakari in hand-to-hand and fighting in Hakari's domain at least once. However, you know, Gojo can't use the Limitless inside the domain, but you get what I'm trying to say. They've trained together. After Hakari and Yuta confirm that they've been hit by Gojo before, Kusakabe then explains that the way Gojo fights with his hands is essentially overlapping the effect from Blue, which sucks things in, with his curse energy enhanced fists. This gives the impact of his blows more strength, but it also feels like you're getting hit by a counter, although it's supposed to be a normal punch. And to save you guys time, the way I'm going to explain how this works is, if Gojo were to try and punch you in the face, he would pull your face in while pushing his fist towards your face. And that's why Hakari says it's like a counter, because when somebody counters you, you're trying to go in for a punch, but they kind of move out the way and punch you in the face. But in Gojo's instance specifically, the force from Gojo's punch, combined with the momentum from you being pulled, is combined in order to enhance the impact of his attacks. Kiara asks them, did it hurt? Yuta's like, I threw up. And you can see from Hakari's face that the same thing happened to him, so I'm not gonna slander Yuta for this. Yuji then says, Nanami said the same thing. We flash back to Nanami telling Yuji, if you want to continue being a sorcerer, don't compare yourself to Gojo. He gives punch-like jabs like my critical hits that take a lot of effort. Long story short, I can't keep up with this shit. And Nanami's basically saying that all that effort Nanami goes through to land a 7-3 critical hit, Gojo can just do that instantly. We go back to Ino putting his mask down because obviously he's sad about Nanami. I'm gonna let Ino chill out here because I feel bad for him. Kusakabe then says, what I want to say is, I don't know what Gojo's doing. We then cut back to Gojo and Sukuna fighting. As Sukuna seemed to have been running and his momentum is stopped, he's then pulled into a bunch of rubble by Gojo's blue, caught by Gojo, and then dragged through tons of rubble, being thrown into a building. Gojo then tries to land another kick on Sukuna, but he easily dodges, only for Gojo to go for another kick, which Sukuna dodges, doing a front flip, and he tries to counter with his own. Gojo dodges this very easily and begins to move so fast that he's creating after images. Gojo goes in for a punch, but Sukuna is easily able to figure out what Gojo's doing here and catches his fist, ending the after images and throwing another fist at Gojo, to which Gojo responds by blocking. This sends Gojo flying, and Gojo's barely able to grab onto a traffic pole, and he lands there. We see Sukuna just standing there, and then it's said, the meaning of the ritual for summoning Mahoraga and his wheel is complete circulation and balance. Mahoraga adapts to the attack after taking it and having the wheel spin. We then see Sukuna's wheel spin, and we see both Kusakabe and Higuruma catch on to what's going on here. We get a look into both of Gojo and Sukuna's plans, with Gojo first saying, when he touches me with domain amplification, Mahoraga's wheel turns black. I'm almost certain that the adaptation is being stopped, though he can't use domain expansion. The reason why he could use domain amplification is probably because the part of the brain that was damaged was the one used for barrier techniques. This means that domain amplification is not actually a barrier technique. Then Sukuna points out about Gojo that Gojo's avoiding the adaptation by not using any curse techniques except for the normal ones. As the traffic light turns green, the two begin to fight once more. Gojo goes flying in with a kick, and jumping off the traffic light so fast made it fall over, and Sukuna catches it and throws it right at Gojo, to which Gojo seems to stop with the Limitless. We then come back to the rest of the cast, saying that Mahoraga is not emerging. Meimei says didn't adapt to the 5th Infinite Void, and then Hakari's like, for the Limitless attack, does that mean it has to spin several times? Kusakabe then says that might be the case, but for them, the impossible is possible. Sukuna then asks Gojo, are you noticing? Gojo points out that you need 4 spins total, so you need 3 more for Mahoraga to adapt to my infinity. This shocks everybody and Yuji says 3 more? Sukuna confirms this by beginning to laugh and says, it's the countdown for that smirk on your face. Gojo then puts out the ugliest smile I've ever seen and says, we're both smirking. He proclaims that he will kill him before the 3 spins. And we come back to Yuji and Hana talking. Hana asks, did he forget about Megumi? And Yuji says maybe. Kashimo ends the chapter with probably the best line in the series. It's okay to forget about her. We start off the chapter with the countdown of fate waiting for no one. As Gojo and Sukuna are running through Tokyo, they begin to battle. The Dharma Chakra spins on Sukuna's head for the 2nd time, with Yuji saying, there's the 2nd spin. And then Gege himself comes in and says 2 more spins, and Mahoraga will adapt to Gojo's infinity. You need to hurry up. As Gojo and Sukuna are running through buildings currently, Gojo activates blue on his hands and sends it flying towards Sukuna, to which he dodges. And if 2 blues weren't enough, Gojo responds by now activating 8 all around Sukuna, with this attempt to close him in failing. But as Sukuna jumps into the air, he comes to understand that all of the rubble from Blue's impact is now also hurling at him. And meanwhile all of this is going on, Gojo attempts to attack Sukuna from behind, but Sukuna is able to react, and Gojo's then able to catch that kick, counter Sukuna, meanwhile sending Sukuna flying into that rubble that was caused by all of his destruction earlier. But the wheel spins once more. Sukuna smirks as he's now on his 3rd spin, victory within his grasp. Hakari does point out that he's now on his 3rd spin and there's 1 more left. Yuji attempts to figure out what exactly is going on here by asking, is it time that's needed for the adaptation, or is it experience? Someone's confused by the way that Yuji phrased his question, and Gege, understanding that some of his readers have horrible reading comprehension, begins to break down what exactly Yuji's asking. He first says, you're asking does it do A, take the attack once, take time to understand it and then adapt? Or does the Dharma Chakra work by adapting incrementally after taking the attack multiple times? Now, not to cut in here, but I'm pretty sure Gege has given us the answer through all the times we've seen Mahoraga, so if somebody wants to go back into the story and figure that out, let us know in the comments. Kusakabe then says, well, considering that Gojo hasn't used any other techniques except for laps, which could it be? Kashimo responds to him saying, either option is possible, and that's all there is to it. I think Gege's trying to make it a point of Kashimo not really being like an intelligent person outside of battle, because he just keeps saying that's all there is to it. He's not even offering real conversation at this point. We come back to Gojo versus Sukuna, with Gojo chasing down Sukuna after sending him flying and saying, now I will give him hell. I've thoroughly convinced him that all I'll use is blue, and with this timing, he won't be able to react. Curse technique reversal, red. And with Sukuna's Dharma Chakra turning black as Gojo activated this technique, Gojo expresses dismay as he realizes that Sukuna knew what Gojo was doing, and thus used domain amplification in order to minimize the damage taken from the red. And now we go into what Sukuna is thinking, with him saying, as expected, even if amplification can neutralize the low output of his neutral limitless, it cannot fully neutralize the strength in blue or the reversal red. We go back to the InfoWars cast, with Higuruma saying he misread it at this rate, and Yuji says it'll adapt. Gojo then attempts to throw even more debris at Sukuna, to which Sukuna just deflects and says, such sloppiness. Have you lost your cool after your hand was red? And Gojo responds saying, you know that red just now still hasn't exploded, right? And Sukuna's shocked, as we see a massive explosion hit Sukuna from behind. And Sukuna then says, from behind me? The building's layout. Did he plan from the start to have red strike after making a full lap around the entire building? Gojo's now in the flow. After sending Sukuna hurling towards him, Gojo takes the initiative and sends a strike towards him, activating the Black Flash. What's insane is, it's been 100 chapters since we last saw the Black Flash. And as we go through the reactions of the self-proclaimed Hakari victim and the rest of the cast, we'd see that Sukuna has been completely knocked out. And you gotta remember that Gojo's techniques and punches are all infused with blue, enhancing the power of his punches. And then couple that with the Black Flash, nobody's surviving that. And the Dharma Chakra falls off of Sukuna's head because the blow was so hard. But the Dharma Chakra falling off of Sukuna's head causes it to do its final roll. And this activates the summoning of Maharaga. Maharaga is then able to pull Gojo into the shadows, nullifying his technique and cutting Gojo in half. The sword that encroaches upon his life. Hands of Evil have finally connected with Gojo, and his 3 favorite students are in shock, but Yuji says, not yet. Even if Maharaga has adapted to his limitless, they're still on equal footing. Besides, Gojo can just heal that attack off anyway. And meanwhile, Yuji's absolutely correct about this. Shoko points out that Gojo's healing speed is only getting slower. He can use the reverse curse technique since he can use red, but both the output of his attacks and his healing are decreasing. Shoko then apologizes for being a little bit negative, but this allows her to point out that it's the same for Sukuna, who's received damage to his brain. Even if the opponent is the strongest of all time, the King of Curses, everyone thought about the impossible, and Gojo Satoru losing came across their minds. And this same thought was one that came across Gojo himself. As Gojo begins to think, I wonder when was the last time? No doubt. But as the sign of losing approaches, so does something even greater, satisfaction. Being an absolute monster and the loneliness that comes from it. What is satisfying Gojo is, we cut to Gojo giving Maharaga the absolute hands, wailing on Maharaga with a flurry of punches and ending with a double open palm strike. This puts Maharaga on his ass, meanwhile choking up spit. And as we know that Gojo's reverse curse technique output is lowered, in order to make up for this loss in power, he begins to chant, preparing a curse technique reversal red in order to finish off Maharaga. But the calamity awakens once more. We then see Rabbit Escape completely cover the battlefield, and as Gojo looks around, he begins to say that it seems as if the Black Flash has been effective, and how long are you going to rest? He prepares another red in order to rid himself of those rabbits, applying way more pressure to Maharaga. It's then explained that Sukuna essentially has to babysit Maharaga throughout this fight, because Maharaga is a key piece to allowing Sukuna to deal damage to Gojo. As we see, Gojo cannot be attacked by Sukuna without Maharaga, As Mahoraga is able to bypass the void of the limitless, Mahoraga making contact with Gojo and shutting down that void is the only chance that Sukuna has to actually hit Gojo with any of his attacks. But Mahoraga cannot obviously fight Gojo on its own, so Sukuna needs to protect it throughout the entire fight. As Sukuna throws a fire extinguisher at Gojo in order to distract him, Mahoraga lays on the ceiling, waiting for the opportunity to strike. Sukuna then makes a pose, one that resembles the piercing blood. He shoots a beam towards Gojo, and this is when Mahoraga strikes. As Mahoraga makes contact with Gojo, the limitless barrier is nullified, and thus, that beam that Sukuna just shot is able to make contact with Gojo and deal some damage to him. Mahoraga then follows up with another slash, and Gojo is able to easily dodge. He then says, Sukuna is not only supporting Mahoraga in this fight, but when Mahoraga makes my barrier vanish, Sukuna will also go for attacks. It seems like it's 2v1 now. How are you able to use Shikigami abilities without even summoning them onto the battlefield? The piercing blood used from the Max Elephant, he's as skilled as I am. Shrine and 10 Shadows cannot be used simultaneously unless he adds the effect to a domain externally. The reason he started using other Shikigami is because he got more resources after Mahoraga was able to adapt to my Infinity. Regarding that, adapting to Red will take more time compared to the Curse technique. For me, this is better than Mahoraga taking away all of the cards that I can play. Gojo finishes up his thoughts, and Sukuna says, do not misunderstand, it's not only a 2v1. He then fuses Nue and Totality and creates the Chimera Beast, Agito. He then points out that this is a 3 against 1. Two massive behemoths stand next to Sukuna, and Gojo then responds to this by saying, you look like a lost child. Sukuna smirks at the joke, and they begin to fight once more. Mahoraga takes the front while Agito stands in the back. Mahoraga takes the first attack towards Gojo, to which Gojo blocks and moves back. And as Gojo thinks he's safe, Sukuna utilizes Gojo's shadow and shoots another beam of light from behind him. Gojo then dodges this, and goes on to dodge many more attacks from all 3 of his opponents. He then gets behind Mahoraga and shoots a red, to which the red is able to push Mahoraga back, but not do that much damage. Gojo then says, the effect is so weak, so it's not just the output that's getting low. It only took red once, so it seems like the adaptation isn't 0 to 100, but gradual. It seems like I only have that to demolish Mahoraga in one shot. It has a big charge, so Sukuna will be aware of it. Attacking without giving me a moment instead of prioritizing the adaptation for red is good proof, but I have no other choice. I'm going to have to use it. The Unlimited Hollow Technique. So we start off with Yuta gripping his sword, stating that he's entering the battle. Kashimo then tells him to get back here and to not interfere, saying at least you're not next. And you really gotta look at this panel between Yuta and Kashimo just staring at each other. It goes so hard, man. Especially seeing Yuta this pissed, we never see Yuta that angry. And I don't know why, but the way that Kashimo and Yuta's personalities are clashing here, it really reminds me of like a Goku Vegeta dynamic or some sort of rivalry like that. Anyways, after Kashimo says what he has to say to Yuta, Hakari agrees with him, telling Yuta to calm down. Kashimo is right about this. Gojo has only allowed us to enter the battle if he's gotten weaker than us. Yuta then retorts saying it's case by case and Sukuna's domain is disabled right now. If Rika and I enter, I can definitely help by handling the 2 Shikigami. And the self-proclaimed Hakari victim has a point here. Things like this are certainly case by case. Jujutsu battles are way too intricate and just anything can happen in them. I get what he's saying here. But when it comes down to it, we all know who Big Bro in this room is, so they gotta listen. Maki then says if anybody's going, it's me. And yeah, we do need to send the fodder out, so I get what she's saying. She tells Yuta to not forget her role, and we're thinking that if you're defeated, then some of the insurance will be gone. Yuta argues back against Maki, saying that if we win against Sukuna, we won't even need that insurance. We should take a gamble. Yuji then comes in and says, Yuta, go for it. We need it. Somebody tell Yuji that the big boys are talking right now. But all jokes aside, I do think that Yuta's correct here. They should take a gamble. That's what all sorcery is about. That's what all Jujutsu battles are about. Gambles, gambles, gambles. And Yuta's right here. If I were in that room, I'd be agreeing with Yuta. And a lot of people may see Yuta as unreasonable here, but you have to understand that This is what Yuta's entire character revolves around, protecting the people that are close to him. So to see Yuta get up, frustrated, and willing to fight back against everybody in this room arguing against him, I think that's some strong characterization from Gege, and I really like that. That whole protecting his friends thing about Yuta is exactly why he's a special grade and why he was able to regain his powers after even losing Rika. Because again, protecting these people that gave him a reason to live, that's all he lives for. So obviously he's gonna be so pissed, and if anything, he'll be the first one to run out. Gege Akutami then says, "You guys don't understand anything." Yuta and Yuji are just like, damn, we know. Meimei then says, Gojo and Sukuna have different winning conditions. Gojo just has to win against Sukuna, because together, they'll be able to handle Kenjaku. But as for Sukuna, even if he wins against Gojo, he will have to fight everybody else in Jujutsu High without a break. Hakari then comes in and says he must have a trump card that he's saving, and if we all go out, he will use it. Yuta's like, so you're saying it's not good to provoke them? And Kusakabe then says yes, they also have Uraume, Sukuna's not being able to give it his all, and Gojo's at his best without a hindrance. These circumstances have the highest probability for winning right now. Kashimo's then like, is this all we have for modern sorcerers? And Big Bro in the room then presses him saying, you know, he had to remind him who's boss, who actually won that battle. Because we know how that went. Kashimo's like, that's not the point, bro. This is a fight for Gojo, and whatever happens, it's lame to interfere with it. Now, am I going to say Kashimo's correct in terms of what's going on in the story? Absolutely not. They should jump Sukuna. But in terms of narrative value, he is absolutely correct. Gege Akutami would not interrupt a fight like this to have characters come in and save one another. That would take away from everything this has been built up to. This is a fight for the strongest. The title of the strongest, okay? This ain't a fight to save the world right now. That's what Kenjaku's for. So, nobody's gonna interrupt. I've been saying this. That's so unrealistic. Just no. We come back to the fight, and Gojo's on his back foot, running away from both Mahoraga and Agito. Mahoraga slides to the back of Gojo and attempts to attack him from behind. And what Gojo does is, he dashes forward and hits Agito with a black flash, while simultaneously dodging Mahoraga's slash. This is the testament to both Gojo's ability to fight in hand-to-hand combat and his agility. But even after such a powerful attack, Agito just brushes it off and regenerates. Gojo then grabs his tail and rips it off. And even that does nothing, as it just regenerates that attack as well. Gojo then says, the new way that I inherited the Great Serpent, the Morn Tiger, and the Round Deer, the point is, the healing effect of Madoka has not been adapted to the Limitless, but I will have to destroy it in one shot, just like I'll need to with Mahoraga. Mahoraga then slashes a bunch of rocks towards Gojo, to which Gojo stops with the Limitless, and then Mahoraga presses up with another slash. But of course, Gojo's able to dodge this and retaliate with a spinning hook kick. And after Gojo lands from this kick, Agito tries to follow up, but he just punches it in the face and says, you're becoming repetitive. He thinks to himself, it'll be tedious if it heals Sukuna, so I have to destroy Agito first. And then Sukuna thinks this is fine. I won't let him have a moment to use his purple. The purple that he used at the start of the fight was more than 120% of the output. It must have had some kind of binding valve. But even when I faced it, I was 4 kilometers away, so I was able to take it and lose only my enhanced arms. But I too am not in my best condition, so if I take a purple right now, it will be fatal. Mahoraga, how long are you having me wait? This is not what I want to see. You're my shadow, not Fushiguro Megumi's. So show me what you have. Good. Everybody's then in shock, with Kusakabe asking Mahoraga can use his slashes. Yuji then says just like Sukuna's, and then Shoko points out that this is not good because Gojo's healing is currently weak. As Mahoraga and Agito come in, Sukuna comes out of his shadow and lands a kick on Gojo. All 3 of them pressure him, with Agito being the first to land a direct hit on Gojo. But Gojo then says, I've been thinking for a while, you're not strong enough to be here. He then grabs Agito and uses a blue maximum output. And as his blue is flying around Shinjuku, it's stated that 40 seconds later, again, Gojo Satoru, Hollow Technique Purple, will leave a scar in Shinjuku, and the battle now enters its climax. And as we come back to Gojo's point of view, it's then said that the two black flashes has allowed Gojo's voltage to rise. And we can see here that Gojo's clearly in the zone, as he's currently able to unleash 120% of his power. And Sukuna, on the other hand, begins to feel nervousness for the first time in 1,000 years. As the battle begins once more, Gojo unleashes another black flash on Mahoraga, which sends it flying back and exposes Sukuna. And as Sukuna attempts to fight back, Gojo's easily able to parry his attack, grab him, and throw him straight into Mahoraga, going in for another black flash, but this one is blocked once more. Mahoraga is sent flying back, and Gojo begins to chant, "Phase, Haramitsu, Pillar of Light," and it's then said, the beginning of cursed energy. The cursed energy that flows out of the sorcerer before activating the cursed technique, like the short hit effect happening right before the domain expansion. And due to this, there will always be a start for a huge move. This rule is not an exception for Gojo, who has an efficient cursed energy consumption. So this allows Gojo's activation for the Hollow Technique Purple to be very obvious. From the enchantment and the scale of cursed energy, and the initiation of the attack occurring in front of him, Sukuna was able to judge that Gojo will be using a cursed technique Reversal Red, and this judgment was correct. As we go into Sukuna's thoughts, he says that he'll have Mahoraga tank it and make him adapt to it as reassurance. After this, we see Cursed Technique Reversal from Gojo, and he doesn't shoot the red at Sukuna, but he shoots it upwards. Sukuna takes a second to think about this, but he realizes and screams for Mahoraga to act. And this causes Mahoraga to jump straight into the air. It's then explained that the Hollow Technique Purple, which is the combination of blue and red, pushes an imaginary mass that occurs ahead of the red that Gojo shot. Was the blue left even after it crushed Agito? And when we see the blue, it's then explained that just like the red that went around the building to attack Sukuna's back, red doesn't have speed before it explodes. Mahoraga, following the order to interfere with the combination of blue and red by stopping the blue using its adaptation, completion of this task was the only thing that ran through Mahoraga's mind. But despite that, it was not possible. Using the quick movement from blue, Gojo's able to come in between Mahoraga and the blue that it attempted to disable by using its adaptation. And due to Mahoraga being able to adapt to blue, it wasn't pulled from the gravity of blue, since its adaptation does not need to select a target for its activation, and thus, the adaptation backfired in this moment. And if you don't get what happened here, Mahoraga would have been able to disable blue if it was able to be pulled into the gravity that blue produces. And since Mahoraga has complete immunity to blue now, it wasn't able to make it in time, since the blue isn't pulling him towards it. And this also gave time for Gojo to intercept Mahoraga's interference of the blue. And I do believe that this is why Kusakabe told Yuta to not interfere with this battle. This is like a 1 billion IQ plan from Gojo, and if Yuta interfered with the battle, it would have destroyed all of this. Gojo was most likely setting up this entire thing from the beginning. And after this plan goes through and Gojo's able to stop Mahoraga, he goes in for a free uppercut on it. And this gives Sukuna the opportunity to stimulate red with piercing blood in order to make it explode. And after Sukuna is able to fire this off, Gojo goes in for a punch on him. But to no avail, the piercing blood still reaches the red. And with that happening, Sukuna says, "You were late." But this once again was all part of Gojo's plan. Gojo begins to enchant his blue. And with the blue's power beginning to increase, it begins to absorb everything around it, including the piercing blood. And as Gojo begins to enchant even more, he enhances his red as well. And we then cut to Yuta apologizing to Kusakabe, saying that if he appeared on the battlefield, Gojo would have never been able to do this. And we then see Hollow Technique Purple. As the dust settles and the debris scars the battlefield, we see a torn up Sukuna with 2 of his limbs. And it's then said by Gojo, "A limitless purple without any aim, making it hit me too." but it seems like there's a difference in the damage. I guess the big factor in me surviving was that it was my own cursed energy that was used. It should be enough for an ad-lib remote purple. And with this attack being the final and decisive blow, Kusakabe then announces the results of the battle, stating that Gojo still has his reverse curse technique from the black flashes, and on the other hand, Sukuna took so much damage with almost no healing, no Maharaga, and being unable to use domain amplification. It's then stated that Gojo is the victor of the battle of the strongest. We come to Geto saying, yo, long time no see, best friend. And Gojo's already saying, oh, come on. What the hell? This sucks. And Geto says, what a rude response to seeing someone's face. And with this very brief interaction and all you know of Jujutsu Kaisen so far, you know what's happened. When you die, you're alone. Didn't I tell my students that? This better all be a figment of my imagination. And Geto responds saying so. It's fine either way. And Gojo then says it's not, and that thing with the dad is still... whatever. I left that for Shoko to deal with anyways. And I believe that this is a reference to him telling Megumi about his father, although who really knows, right? It's left ambiguous for a reason. Geto asks Gojo, so, how was it? You were able to fight the King of Curses himself. And Gojo says he was hella strong and he still didn't even go all out. Even if he didn't have Megumi's 10 shadows, I'm not sure if I would have won. Geto says, you admitting this is quite impressive. And Gojo says, I feel a little bad about it actually. I used to believe that I, more than anyone else, can empathize with him about the loneliness of being at the top. I liked everyone around me. And I wasn't lonely, but somewhere along the way, a line was drawn between me and other people, or rather, living beings. You can make a flower bloom and you can admire it, but you'll never ask the flower to understand you. The body I trained, the skills I learned, and the senses I honed, even my spontaneous creativity and fast thinking, I used it all. I wanted to convey all of it to Sukuna, and I wanted that to reach him. Absolute strength and the loneliness that comes with it. The one who will teach you about love is... It was fun. Sukuna never went all out against me, and this is what I feel bad about. Geto says, are you trying to make me feel jealous? But if you were satisfied, then I'm glad. And Gojo says, satisfied? I think I would have been completely satisfied if you were there to give me a pat on my back. Geto laughs. Either way, I'm glad that what killed me wasn't time or illness, but someone stronger than I am. Geto says, what are you, a general now? And the two begin to argue, but Geto points out that maybe this is why you lived longer than I did. Haibara cuts in and says, the difference between you two is statistically negligible. Aren't you guys happy to see Haibara? Because I'm definitely am. Anyways, Nanami cuts in and says, once I asked Geto why we didn't just leave everything to you, Gojo. You weren't the kind of person who wielded Jujutsu to survive or protect something. You just did whatever you wanted to satisfy yourself. Haibara then backs this up and says, I know everybody thought that, but you weren't supposed to say it out loud. And Gojo just says, Haibara, you're making it worse. If you're confused about this little segment, I'm pretty sure this is saying that Nanami wanted Gojo to take over because Gojo doesn't see missions as big of a deal as any other sorcerer does. He doesn't feel as much responsibility because it's just so easy to him. I'm pretty sure this is what this line was going for, but let me know if I'm wrong. Haibara then apologizes for saying this, and Nanami says, but I guess that turned out to be correct, and he even just admitted it himself. It's an ending most true to yourself. I wouldn't recommend it, but I sympathize with you. Gojo says thanks, but what was it like for you? Haibara says, well, I got ahead of myself, and Nanami says, a curse can sometimes help you live. And Gojo says, I suppose Jujutsu can do the same. I once asked Mei where she would recommend me moving to, and she said, if you wish to make yourself new, go north. If you wish to return to who you once were, go south. I chose the Southernlands without any hesitation, and even in the end, a pessimist like me bet everything on the future. This referring to Yuji. It wasn't a bad ending at all, and I have to thank Haibara as well. And Haibara says you're welcome. Gojo then says I see. He yells for his teacher, asking him, didn't you say that Jujutsu sorcerers never die without any regrets? and we see all of our characters laugh one last time. And we conclude with Gojo saying, "I pray with all my heart, this all isn't a figment of my imagination." And once we come to the present, we see how things truly ended. Maharaga's adaptation can only begin after a single attack. Once enough time passes, it completes the adaptation. If it receives more than enough hits during that process, it will reduce the time it takes to adapt. And even after the first time it adapts to the Jujutsu, the analysis isn't truly complete. It can continue to adapt further. What I wanted from Maharaga was instructions as to how to defeat your infinity. And when Maharaga first adapted to this infinity, it changed the nature of his cursed energy to neutralize and nullify it. That's not something I can do, so I chose to wait. I waited for an adaptation to your infinity that would suit me, and that second adaptation was exactly what I wanted. This adaptation allows for an extension of its original technique, an extension not just to Gojo, but to space, to existence and reality itself. Then, it cut. Regardless of Gojo's infinity, as long as Gojo exists within this world, a spatial reality, all that exists within that space can be cut. And through watching Maharaga, Sukuna was able to piece this all together, saying that he would have never been able to experience this, to learn this technique, had Maharaga not set such a great example in the first place. And now we see here why exactly Sukuna is such a great threat. It's not his power, it's not the gifts he's been giving, but it's his aptitude. And this was something Angel had warned us about very early on in this fight. Sukuna is able to essentially just learn things very easily and improve upon his techniques if he has to. And scarily enough, Sukuna just seems so powerful in this series that he really never had to do this up until now. But this is something he's always been able to do. And this is something he has in common with Mahito. Mahito, who seemed to be his successor. People said that Mahito wasn't going to be Sukuna's successor or really had no chance to because his power level was too low. But that was never the point. The point was that Mahito learns way too fast and during combat. And now with the conclusion of this fight, we see why this is such a huge problem. As Sukuna sends off Gojo, he says that he was amazing and that he will never forget him. Sukuna is the winner. Without any moments to mourn Gojo's death, Sukuna says that he feels well and to not let him down. We see that the next one to enter the battle after the fall of the strongest modern sorcerer is the strongest of the Edo period, the Thunder God, Hajime Kashimo.